I welcome Matt Edgeworth to the HKW talks on the Anthropocene. He is a practicing field archaeologist and honorary research fellow at the School of Archaeology and Ancient History at the University of Leicester. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
You are a member of the Anthropocene working group,
Yes.
which at the moment is having her first meeting here at the HKW. Perhaps can you describe with a few words from your perspective what the role of the group is?
Okay, the Anthropocene working group is set up to discuss the issue of when the Anthropocene started and what its status is as a geological epoch. It's set up by geologists, and I think they're very much leading the debate forward. But it also includes geochemists and archaeologists. I myself am an archaeologist. And people from many different disciplines. So coming at it from lots of different angles. Yeah. So there's a kind of collision, but also a collaboration of different methods and perspectives.
Yeah. So you have also to develop a common language to understand
very much so,
yourself.
Yeah. And I think this is especially true for me because as an archaeologist, I'm a little bit more from the social science background, although we're kind of in the centre of that division between what used to be a division between science and social science.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of an issue in the debate where one directly see that an archaeologist has a different perspective of a process or an idea than a geologist, for example?
I think in many respects we're very similar because we both deal with the earth, we deal with sediments in the ground, we're very hands-on, so we automatically tend to get on. But we're obviously different in the sense that geologists look at the deep time scale, whereas we're very much looking at the scale of human history.
Yes.
And that's different. It changes everything because on the scale of 4.5 billion years, that's such a long period of time. Yeah. But archaeologists are sort of changing that by about 4 or 5 orders of magnitude to just look at the scale of human history or the Holocene, say the last 10,000 years or something like that.
But now one of the theses of the Anthropocene is to say that human mankind are entering this geological time.
Yeah.
So does that also mean for you as an archaeologist you have to reframe the way you produce knowledge, because the object of what you are investigating is entering another age?
Yes, that's really true. And I think that one thing exemplifies that more than anything else, and that is if we dig an archaeological trench or we drill a geological borehole, that actually becomes part of the record. So we have this set of deposits in the ground. I and others have called it the archaeosphere. But if we investigate that, our very method of investigation becomes part of the formation of that layer.
Yes.
So, and actually changes its configuration in the ground.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, and I think we're all having to come to terms with the fact that we're not just looking back at something that's happening in the past.
Yes.
But very much something that's unfolding.
That was exactly my next question, because normally my idea or my notion of archaeologists is they are dealing with civilizations which are thousands years old, or and now the one definition of the Anthropocene, or one approach to the Anthropocene, is that it is a development which was triggered, let's say, in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
What does that mean for an anthropologist? On the one side, you have geological time as a reference point. On the other side, you have contemporary time, so to say.
Yeah. I think it's true, and in a sense, there has been this division in the ground itself, as well as a division between academic disciplines,
Yes.
where geologists would tend to study deposits below a certain level.
Yeah.
And we would tend to study the deposits on top. But now geologists have very much moved into our kind of territory.
Yes.
So they're looking at things like industrial dumps and artificial ground.
Yes.
And archaeologists also, our field is changing too. We used to look at the very ancient past, but we're now seeing that it's much more interesting to apply archaeological perspectives to the recent past and the present, because that's all part of understanding our relationship to material things.
And how does that change your discipline, this kind of new approach?
I think our discipline is changing radically. So, for example, there's a new journal, the Journal of Contemporary Archaeology.
Yeah.
Now, some people would take that as a contradiction in terms, but I don't think it is. I don't think archaeology is necessarily about old things. Or maybe it is, because in a sense, in the concept of archaeology, it's the notion that even what we're doing now, even the deposits which we leave, will be looked back on at some point in the future. So we are ourselves creating the archaeology or the geology of the far future.
So to some extent you take a perspective from the future on the present?
Yeah, I think that's implicit in the notion of archaeology.
Wow.
Yeah, as well as taking a view from the present to the past.
Yeah. What is fascinating for me on this concept of Anthropocene is that it's not defined already by disciplines. And what you are describing is that the disciplines we knew in the past, they are finding and exploring new ways. Yes. So to some extent, I call it always, it's an idea in the making. And the way you describe your work as an archaeologist is when you really dig into the earth and experience the earth. It seemed to me it's a kind of, to some extent, a practice which is theoretical at the same time. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I think archaeology is definitely a practice. It's an engagement with materials, with the ground. But of course you inevitably take ideas and concepts with you and apply them to the material. But what's extraordinary about archaeology, and I think marks it out as a mode of investigation, is that, one, you never know what you're going to discover. For certain, you can have some idea in advance. But when you actually dig into the ground, things surprise you. So they change your way of thinking about them, literally as they come out of the ground. And you're kind of shaping the material in order to uncover it and reveal it. But in the very shaping of it, it's kind of shaping you back in return. So your ideas are being challenged by the material itself. And for a long time we've had this idea that we just apply our theory onto the stuff, you know. But I think we're increasingly realizing through our practice that the stuff is leading us in some sense as well, and that if you kind of open yourself up to be led along by the material a little bit, as well as applying our ideas to it, that we can actually be significantly changed by our encounters with that stuff.
So would you say by, the way you described your work, which is basic to the Anthropocene notion, from my perspective too, there is a re-evaluation of the material world in our thinking as humans, not just in the sciences.
Yes, I think so. I think that's very true. We see material as we have seen material as something separate from ideas, haven't we?
Yes, yes.
I think increasingly we're beginning to realise, and especially in the Anthropocene, where the material world is, in a sense, pressing in on us quite urgently.
Yeah.
We're beginning to realise that our ideas are intermeshed with material things.
So what you are describing is that you are not just shaping and reacting to the material world, but at the same time you are also reconceptualizing the role of human beings by that.
I believe so, yes, because for so long we've had this idea that humans are kind of somehow separate from the rest of nature, but clearly that's being challenged in many different ways by many different fields.
And what does that mean for your discipline or for you as a scientist? Because evidently what you do is not just describing the world, but engaging into the world on the material level, but also on the social political level.
I think it changes everything. So we're having to, for archaeologists now, I think we're being challenged to, in a sense, come out of our little trenches and to look at these bigger issues that are really quite pressing and quite urgent, and to say, well, what is our role in that context? And indeed, in the context of the Anthropocene, clearly archaeology does have a role, simply because the material evidence of human beings, the deposits they leave behind, and the traces they've left on the surface of the earth, these form the archaeological record.
Yes.
So where else would one look to kind of understand that or to get a grasp of it than archaeological material? And I think archaeologists could very usefully transfer our perspectives from our quite small trenches and sites to looking at these kind of deposits on a much larger scale, because increasingly these deposits are actually becoming a kind of force and presence in their own right. So especially if you look under cities like Berlin and London, where you have really substantial deposits of urban ground or accumulation of occupation debris. And more or less anything you do in those cities is partly contingent upon that material. And the material is encroaching upon the environments of other species as well as our own. And it's even creating kind of its own habitats where species are having to adapt to it. So if you think of rats in sewers and spiders in houses and so on, that our kind of cultural world, its nooks and crannies, are actually inhabited by the natural world, by non-human things.
To which extent does this thinking of yours, which to some extent I mentioned that already earlier, is I see as a new philosophy, philosophy in practice, so to say, changing really the discipline of archaeology. Can one see already that the discipline has changed? Because we at the Haus are interested in these new processes. We are not so concerned about the discipline. But you, as a scientist working at university, of course, you have to be also concerned with the discipline. What does it mean for your discipline?
Right. I think the discipline is changing, but of course we're still quite, we're creatures of habit as archaeologists. So I'm quite happy to go back to my site and just work away as I always have done. But we are being changed at the same time, and we're being changed by, as I said before, this relationship with the issues of the Anthropocene and the challenge that presents to us to engage with other disciplines. So as archaeology gets to grips with geological concepts and biological and geochemic concepts, we will be changed. We will be radically impacted upon. So, and I like to think that in some way archaeology also has an important contribution to make to those important general discussions about the Anthropocene.
So you, as an archaeologist, are thrown from your site into the world.
Yeah, it definitely is a case of being thrown. Yeah, definitely. And but at the same time, I can really see that the material behind us is what's really throwing us, and it's not just being thrown by an abstract force. It's the material itself has a kind of force behind it, which is sort of telling us to engage, if you like.
Thank you very much, Matt, for this wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you, Bernd.
Okay.
Thanks.